You went from like 70 plus staff to 27. Can you talk about that and how you deal with that culturally?
If you're a staff member and you see that we're reducing staff, you're obviously
That makes
worried,
you
right?
worry, yeah.
You're worried that, hey, am I next or is my position going? Growth eats capital. It is just the way it is. What are we trying to accomplish? It all comes down to what your goals are. Once we understand where we're going and we work through the challenges and we start working down the process, we can start to become more efficient through systems, technologies, outsourcing things, and then we can reduce the cost to do that.
You've mentioned having a 5% profit, and now last year you did over 700 million.
If we wanted to look at this as being the main hub of a profit center, we could make adjustments and we could get there. But I think as a company, we have to come together. What are our visions? What is the goal? And if growth is always the vision, that means we're going to have to take capital and reinvest it. We could have a system, but if we haven't built a culture that's going to embrace that system and use it, then it's irrelevant what the system is.
Billy, when you kind of joined and came on to the Laughton Group,
Yeah.
you helped them increase revenue by 50%, and then you tripled or quadrupled the agent count. And now last year you did over 700 million. But you did one like pivotal change where you went from like 70 plus staff to 27. So can you talk about that and how you deal with that, like culturally, how you dealt with that operationally? I'm sure a lot of stuff changed.
Yeah, I mean, you got to think about, scalable systems, right? When you're scaling, 75 staff, 250 agents, there are certain systems that need to be in place. One of the things that we try to do is make sure that the systems that we have, right, are adaptable to those things and market conditions and, all the things that go into understanding and forecasting as to what you need. At 75 staff, we had a channel partner that took a lot of the staff specific things that needed to be done. And as that market shift, that channel partner shift, we realized certain positions were needed. So the challenge is, how do you keep morale? How do you keep, an organization that, we have growth is always the mindset, but we're reducing in staff. It feels like we're reducing. Some of that's beyond our control, right? Market shifts, things happen. We need to make adjustments. And so a lot of it comes down to communication, right? You gotta paint the vision. You gotta do those things so that people understand where we're going and why we're going there. From an operations standpoint, like where I sit, it's sometimes we talk about the agents in real estate, or a lot of times we talk about the agents, right? We want the agents to know, hey, we're viable, we're strong, we're still moving forward. But if you're, a staff member and you see that we're reducing staff, you're obviously
That makes
worried,
you
right?
worry, yeah.
You're worried that, hey, am I next or is my position going? We've always tried to operate out of integrity. It's one of our core values, and we've always tried to be very transparent with where we're going, And so I think that was one of the communication to the staff directly as to like, hey, here's where we're at, here's what's happening, and here's what we're trying to do. And not sugarcoating it, because at the end of the day, they see it, right? And I think we lose integrity when we create one story, but the ground truth is that we are letting staff go. So I would say, one of the biggest, keys to that is communication. In forecasting, obviously budget is the issue, right? When we understand that, income is going to change, we got to look at expenses, and, in the P&L, people they're one of the top expenses. So with that, we look at, what are the things we absolutely need to continue to drive the business forward? What are those positions, and what should we realistically be spending on that? And where do we need to cut in all areas of the business, not just people, it's systems, it's processes, it's technologies, all those things. But I'll keep going back to it's communication, right?
Yeah.
It's just clearly communicating, operating out of integrity, right? So that everyone knows, and then being transparent if they are in a position where we might need to be letting them go, is giving them a runway so they don't feel like they're blindsided.
Yeah, and curious, I know you're a COO, so maybe you didn't always do all of the communication, but curious from your lens and from a CEO lens, how do you communicate that well, effectively, or how did you communicate it? Like, is it a big meeting where you're kind of talking about it with everyone, or like what does that look like?
Yeah, some of that transition was during COVID, right? So some of that was remote on Zoom, right? So we would we would get the stakeholders. So a lot of it was departmental. At that point, we had several departments, and usually it came down to, you know, they could tell this department may or may not be needed moving forward. So we'd get those departments together along with the department head. I'd have a communication with the department head, the leader of that, you know, group first to say, here's where we're at. And then I would come in as a support piece so that I could be there to have those conversations with them and answer any questions. And I always tried to be very honest with them when they'd ask the questions. You know, I wouldn't try to sugarcoat and say, oh yeah, definitely you guys, you know, nothing's happening, we're good, don't worry. I would say, hey, our goal is to continue to grow. And our hope is that we can move through this in a way that keeps as many people employed as possible, right? The thing I can promise you is that we'll continue to diligently work at that, and we'll communicate to you as far out in front and as clear as we can that when that's not possible, that we'll be transparent with you and we'll give you as much runway as we possibly can. So it was some direct communication and then communicating with our leadership.
And you being the COO, like, how was that for you on like a day-to-day basis? Like looking at the P&L, dealing with emotions, dealing with people.
Yeah, I would say, you know, majority of my job is really kind of facilitating, you know, the communication with people, like dealing with the staff and the people and those type of things. And so it's tough. It's tough because you can, you know, a lot of this is forecasting. A lot of this is looking at, you know, when transaction count is predicted to go down, that means income's going down, and how are we going to make that adjustment? And it is tough. We have tended to always stay a little heavy on the people side because growth is always the vision, and we want to be prepared for whatever that next thing is. Mm-hmm. So we're willing to take a little hit on the P&L to make sure that we're prepared and that we have the right people in place to continue to grow, right? So it's tough, but I think I've been able to get through it, like I said, and I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but acting out of integrity and communicating to people the best we can. Are we perfect at it? No, but we do the best we can. And, you know, have there been some situations where, you know, we've had to really, you know, balance the idea of what we could share and what, you know, the forecast looks like versus what reality is? Yeah. But in general, I think I've been able to work through it by being transparent, acting with integrity, and truly wanting what's best for people. And you know, our goal was to try to keep as many people as possible, right?
Yeah. And I'm curious, like, what did you learn as a CEO? Like, you deal with a lot of people, and like it's people management. So like, what have you kind of learned through that?
You know, fierce conversations. Don't be afraid to have the fierce conversation. Don't be afraid to have the conversation that needs to be had. And, you know, we kind of operate, and I forget who said it, but, you know, don't be afraid to ask the question that you don't think you can ask, right? I think when you break down that barrier of talking about the thing that you maybe don't think you can talk about that or might be difficult to talk about, it really does build that foundation of trust. And when you do that, I think people can work through hard times together in a way that's respectful and honoring. You know, again, not always perfect, but what I've learned is, you know, the earlier you can have those conversations, the more out in front of those things you can be and have those direct conversations, the easier it goes for everybody, and the more cared for the people feel, is they feel like that they understand it's not a fun situation, but they feel like that you handled it in the best situation possible.
Yeah. And curious, like now you have 200 agents roughly, and like some people might not understand that scale of a P&L, and you've mentioned like having, like, for example, sometimes in growth like a 5% profit margin, and I'm curious, like, what are your thoughts when you like see that, or like what do you learn versus people who are like, oh, I want like a 20 to 30% profit margin, and how do you balance like having a high profit versus using the profit for like growth and stuff?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to what your goals are, right? Like if we wanted to look at this as being the main hub of a profit center, like we could make adjustments and we could get there. That's you know, doable, right? But I think as a company, we have to come together on what are our visions. You know, what is the vision? What is the goal? What are we trying to accomplish, right? And so we look at it in that realm. So a lot of times growth eats capital. It is just the way it is. And if growth is always the vision, that means we're going to have to take capital and reinvest it.
Yeah.
And a lot of that comes down to people. Like you got to have people to move things forward, right?
Yeah.
Now, once we understand where we're going and we work through the challenges and we start working down the process, we can start to become more efficient through systems, technologies, outsourcing things, and then we can reduce the cost to do that. But there's always in our mind going to be a level of that expense when it comes to growth, because we're not satisfied with staying here. We want to have the opportunity to grow things bigger, grow other areas of income, other businesses, those type of things. And so in order to do that, we have to decide, where we're going to invest that capital. And so we've just made a decision. So I think what I've learned is you got to be on the same page as a leadership group, right?
Yeah.
Like when you have a CEO who is who has visions and drives to grow, you obviously have to tether that with what's possible versus what the dream is, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's it, right? It's understanding that we're all after the same goal. We're looking to continue to grow, and that what are we comfortable with for that growth. And then once you make that decision, now you drive that's the lens in which you look through expenses, income, and systems and all that. You look through that lens, and it's a unified lens that everybody's looking through.
And I want to get into in a little bit, what is it like being a COO, working with a high visionary CEO, and what does actually a COO do versus just an operations manager? The differences there.
Yeah.
But I was a little curious, when you look at the organization today and you're thinking through how you want to structure it between departments, what senior level leadership is needed, and then where we want to get to, we need new positions. So you have to start kind of forecasting what should the team look like. What do you think are the essential departments in an organization? And then what do you feel are things that you're trying to grow into as well, especially in the leadership layer?
Yeah, we operate a lot of it under three main kind of buckets, right? You've got your sales. We're a sales organization first and foremost, right? Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, we got to generate income. So you have your sales side, and then you have your operations side, which is kind of the support piece on the back end, and then you have your I call it the financial piece, like how are you your CFO, you're managing the budget and those type of things. I kind of look into those three buckets, right? Yeah. And we can tend to, when you have a lot of people, you can tend to get very operational. And so one of the things that we always have to do is look at, who are we and what do we do? We are a sales organization. So, as a COO, my job is to understand what the vision is and what do we need to support that vision. Yeah. Whether it's a technology, a system, a department, an individual, a role. And the good thing about our group, I think, in general, is we're pretty collaborative. Again, you hear me talk about core values. It's one of our core values is collaboration, right? And so the cool thing is I don't ever feel like I'm out on an island having to make these decisions, right? Where I feel like, the COO role, or at least, who I am and where I thrive best is in this idea of supporting, if you want to get here, coming up with that playbook and the plan on how to get there. What are the things that need to happen? What are the steps that need to take place in order to get there and build the foundation of how to get there? And so that's kind of where, as a COO, I look at it as from top down. Yeah. What are the layers of leadership that need to happen? What departments need to be involved? And what are the tasks and the key objectives of those areas that we need to make sure that those things go forward, and then trying to fit that all within a budget, right? Yeah. And so that's, to me, kind of the overall high level core function of what I feel like, my role and what the COO role is here in this industry.
Nice. And I was just curious if maybe we can think through a little bit of for example, the 20 to 50 size team to what you are now, 200 plus 300, what is important to make that transition? Mm-hmm. And then I'm curious, the jump that you guys are trying to make now, what do you guys are forecasting of what you need? But
yeah, I mean, it's systems is part of it, right? What are the technologies you're using to create efficiencies and scale and automate things so that whether I have 50 agents or 250 agents, it doesn't, it doesn't weigh the system down no matter what. So whatever we're
Yeah.
building, we need to make sure it's built for growth, because growth is always the vision, right? So a lot of it is technologies. Using technology is what makes sense. We also are very careful that we're not what we call a shiny object. There's a ton of technologies out there, a lot of it in the industry, right? Everybody's got a new, especially now with AI. Everybody's got a new AI. Everybody's got a new, software that's going to solve all your problems, right? We tend to kind of look at it like we kind of take a step back, we evaluate on, see which ones kind of take the lead and become, the forefront of the industry or whatever it is. But we're always evaluating against our needs, right? We know a lot of teams across the country that are involved in a lot of things that do very good things. But when I evaluate those systems on, against what we do, what our vision is, it's not always, doesn't always, mesh, and it's not always the thing we should be doing, right?
Yeah.
So one is, systems and technologies to make sure that we have what we need. And then when we're talking about agent count, what are the things that, pressure that the system is pressurized with, and where do we need to support them? Obviously onboarding.
Yeah.
So we need a really good, efficient onboarding system. Training. What are we doing to make sure that these agents are getting productive so that they're getting the value that they need here, right? And then it's that ongoing support, right? Like really trying to identify, kind of that leader to agent ratio, right? When we bring in so many agents, at what point do we need to add a leader and grow into certain markets, right? And so that's really what it comes down to, is trying to build the systems that we can handle today. I can handle recruiting one agent a day or 10 agents a day, and then we're not going to, weight the system down. So that's kind of the way we approach it. And so we leverage technology, we leverage VAs, we leverage the things that we can scale quickly and just add to as we hit different thresholds. Because like I said, growth is always a vision. 300 agent count and beyond is where we're looking to grow. And so the systems need to be able to handle those things.
Yeah, and I don't think everyone always thinks through what is the actual cost of like hiring 10 agents month over month. It's not as easy as it sounds. Like there's weight to that comes. Now you have 20 agents, and it's like compounding month over month.
Yes.
And it's like the onboarding and the training, what did you learn? Because one, adoption is one of the biggest problems, and then just going through it, what did you learn actually works through onboarding? Okay, maybe videos didn't work, or they need in-person trainings, or X or Y. I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's funny that I was on a phone call right before I came in, to meet with you, and the conversation we were having was around that, because we are in the process of updating a lot of our training and kind of revamping what it looks like to be on our team for the first 90 days, because we want to make sure that the agent has every opportunity to get productive in the first 90 days. We feel like that is a key metric to focus on, to make sure that the agents come on and are successful beyond into the future.
It's time to value, or first win.
Yeah, they need to feel successful. They need to have that win, build that stable of stories, and continue to be motivated to continue to grow, right? Mm-hmm. I think agents, there's a plethora of reasons why agents stay with, an organization, but I think two key ones are, one, they need to feel connected. They need to feel like there's a reason why they're here and they're connected, and they need to be productive. They need to make money. At the end of the day, that's why they're here, right? So we want to, in the onboarding process, we want to create a process that does both of those things, right? Yeah. We want to create an interdependence that says, hey, we're better with you in the building, and you're better with us alongside you as you grow your business, right? Mm-hmm. And so onboarding needs to do that. Now, I think it's a mixture of things, right? I also think there's a difference between, we have to be mindful of difference between systems and culture, right? Mm-hmm. So meaning, we could have a system, but if we haven't built a culture that's going to embrace that system and use it, then it's irrelevant what the system is or the technology, right? So whether it's video, if we haven't built the culture that training is done through video, and that we're going to drive agents back to watch the videos, that's just one way. When you buy a CRM, I hear it all the time, this CRM is better than that CRM. We're a follow-up user, but at the end of the day, if you don't build the culture that the agent should be in the CRM doing their business, the CRM and how it functions is irrelevant if they're not given the instruction and accountability to go through that. So that's the way, we've learned over the years with onboarding. We're still trying to figure it out. We're still trying to make the best experience we can with onboarding. I think we provide a lot of value, and it's really just identifying what is truly of value, what does the agent truly need in those first 90 days to get productive, and how can we present it in the best way. And so, again, it's a combination of live people involved, so a connection to the company, video, online training. They got to have some of it on demand, and they got to have it when they want it because they want it quickly, right? Yeah. But it also has to be good, right? It has to be of value and not just stuff that you're giving them to stay busy. There needs to be a purpose, and it needs to align with the mission of the onboarding.
Yeah, so many things came up. Like one, like for a system to work, you need the culture, and what came to me in my mind is just accountability.
Yeah.
It's like you can create this system, but if there's no accountability to the system, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, 100%. If you're not driving them to the behaviors you're expecting, then I was a top producer user, not to, back in the day, and I used to have agents go, oh, I just don't like it. And then I'd look in and they hadn't logged in 8 months. Well, you can't really tell me whether you like it or not. You haven't logged in 8 months, right? But on the flip side, then we had to evaluate, well, if they're not logging in 8 months, what are we doing as an organization to drive that behavior? If that's what we're expecting, then we need to build a culture that says this is the behavior and the expectation that you should be, exemplifying to make sure you're a productive agent within our system.
And I'm curious, how do you operationalize culture?
Yeah, it's tough. And I think that is the line that, as I was telling you, at the end of the day, we're a sales organization. And, at the end of the day, most agents, they just give me an appointment. I want to get in front of people because that's where the real relationship and, that's really where they get productive and, make the income they're looking to make is really that. Yeah. So we really do have to be careful to not over operationalize the process because they're just not going to engage in it. So one of the ways I think is, you give them every opportunity to understand best practices, right? So some of it's training, right? Live training, in-person training, on-demand training. Some of it is training. I think people can overtrain, and you got to be very cautious of providing too much training because at the end of the day, they need to be out there doing the work. Yeah. But I think it's truly, it's getting almost one-on-one with that agent, meaning making that connection that I was talking about, giving your leaders an operational system to operate within and give them the freedom within that system to kind of have their own plan within the context of an agent. So meaning I can give them, here's the structure of a meeting you should have with an agent. But you have the freedom within the context of that structure to adjust where you can meet the needs of the agent in that moment, right? So you give them the framework, you continue to iterate on what best practices are, but also give them the freedom to make those adjustments when the context of their meeting and one-on-one relationship and connection to the agent.
Yeah, best practices is probably really important. Like, what does good look like?
Yeah.
It's like that's what you want modeled throughout the organization.
100%.
So when you look at, for example, like video trainings, like I'm sure it's very easy to overemphasize that as well. And then holding people accountable, there's probably different ways like homework or something like that. Like one with the video, is that like George creating the video, or is that the sales leaders creating the video? Are you creating like, here's the general idea of like the structure of the onboarding for 1-2 weeks, a month should look like? Just like the thinking around all of that.
Yeah, I think, one, we look at, who's responsible for that section of the business, right? Whether it's transaction management, whether it's lead generation, whether it's lead conversion, right? So we try to get those people involved, who are the connectors and the galvanizers to those things in the business, to be the ones to be a part of those things.
Okay.
And so I think that's extremely important. I think, from a higher level leadership, so say, George, his involvement's going to be more about, welcome to the team. here's who we are as an organization. Here's what we want to represent in the community, and we're excited to have you. And we have a ton of tools to make you successful, right?
Yeah.
And giving the overall, vision of who we are and what we're about, right? When it comes down to actually how they grow their business and what they're going to do, they're going to be connected to so many different people within the organization. So we try to put the person that's, to keep some, symbiotic relationship between training and actual, practice in the real world, in that realm. And from a video perspective, right, we try to be very careful to not, again, building connection.
Yep.
So you can build it through video, but at the end of the day, I got to build that relational connection. So, video should be there. It should be a part of the training, should be part of the process, but it should be in conjunction with the real one-on-one relationship, live training, even Zoom training, those type of things. It should be just part of the process, but now it's available to go back to at any time that you need to reference it. You need to, learn more about it, get more in depth, so that you can move along at the pace that's comfortable for you.
Okay. And I'm curious, your level of thinking around this is, have you started to think through this at a high level where it's okay, each, thing is, for example, training is like a book, and there's chapters in that book, and we need to kind of fill those chapters. And, have you kind of, and then you need to do that for, this department, this department, this department. It's you're just trying to duplicate that. I'm just, honestly curious.
So if I'm understanding what you're asking, it's how do we view the style of training we're looking for? So what is the goal of the training? Is it just to, I think of it is it just to get through a module, answer questions, and now you're done and move on to the next? Or is it truly practical training where we're evaluating your proficiencies and those type of things, right? So I think there's two ways to look at that. One is, for me, I always have to look at what does onboarding and training look like for staff, and what does onboarding and training look like for agents. I think they're two different ways of viewing that.
Yeah.
From an agent perspective, right, I think the way we've always approached it to this point is essentially giving you the tools and resources to learn, and then getting you out in real world application as quick as possible to learn and work through those things. But we're currently evaluating, like I said, we're in the process of redoing that. And I think there's a case to be made for, holding accountability to productivity and mastery of skills, right? Here's how you present a great buyer's presentation, right? And that at the end of that training, having some sort of mechanism in place that verifies that you actually understand it and you can actually apply it and do it in the real world situation, right?
Yeah.
Because that's going to set the agent up for the highest level of success. Instead of, here's your module, as long as you get through module 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, now you're ready to go out in the real world.
Yeah.
But we really don't know whether that actually sunk in or whether that actually made an impact on you and you understand it in the real world. So it's understanding how we can set toll gates within that training to make sure you're getting it and grasping it through moving on. And then when we're done with it, that you actually understand it and know it. From a staff perspective, we're hiring you to do a job. We need to make sure that you have the tools and resources and the training to do the job. And then it's pretty clear, you can see in the results and the metrics and those things whether or not that job is being done.
Yeah, because from a sales side, it's you can look at what are the tactical things that they need to do, buyer's presentation, listing presentation.
Yep.
If they're making phone calls,
Yep.
scripts. From an admin support staff, sometimes it's a little more tricky. It's okay, a finance person, that might be a little harder to create training around. Marketing, well, how should we do Instagram? So it's you have to be able to balance both and be okay, we can operationalize sales a lot easier. Staff might be a little tougher.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always trying to evaluate. I think people on a staff side, they want to know how they win. They want to know what constitutes success in their job. Mm-hmm. And then they want to feel like they're fairly compensated for that work, right?
Yep.
And so we want to align compensation and incentives with the goals that we want to see from the role. So the challenge comes in is identifying what those metrics are and what that win is and clearly communicating that win to the staff, right? It's how do you know that you're doing your job and you're doing it well? Well, one is you have a clear goal that you're supposed to hit, and two, you're compensated to hit that goal, right?
Yeah.
And so that's always a challenge. Our controller, who we've known for many, many years and does a phenomenal job, and most people don't know that this business doesn't operate without the way Kim operates and pays the bills and those type of things. Well, that's a hard role to come up with a metric other than the bills are paid, we have money in the bank, and you're keeping us informed as to where we're at with the operational side of cash flow, right?
Yep.
Like that's a pretty key metric to be bills are paid and I'm not getting collection calls, right? So you can, sometimes we don't need to overthink it. Like the metric is the metric. But other roles, you got to be a little more creative on how to understand, like, I'll say from a transaction management role, right? Feedback surveys and, understanding of how they're operating inside a transaction management system, like really coming up with clear and communicating those goals clearly to them so that they understand this is how they're winning. Outside of, well, as long as the agents aren't, unhappy and complaining, you're doing a good job, right?
Yeah.
They don't know that because they want the feedback. They want to understand, am I doing the job that I'm expected to do? And am I being fairly compensated for that job?
Really quickly, before we get back into the episode, do you want to grow a hyper-local media company like Kyle Talbot? He added $20 million in sales to his real estate business using Instagram and YouTube. And I created a completely free playbook in the description below. It goes over all of his templates, everything that he used to grow over 70,000 followers on Instagram, 10,000 on YouTube. So if you want to download it and implement it in your business today, click the link below and download it. It's completely free. Let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, makes sense. And here's, like, we talked to Billy, like George.
Yeah.
One of the goals is like 150 agents, and he knows to do 150. About 90 are going to likely deselect throughout the process.
Yep.
Being okay with that gap, and then like building, like, everything is like trying to balance two things. Like, you're trying to have the most, but then you're also trying to have quantity and quality at the same time, and retention. And like, in an ideal world, you wouldn't necessarily want like you don't want to go 150 and then 140 drop off.
100%.
So
yeah, it is a balance, right? Like, you don't want as many that are, coming in the front door, going out the back door, right? At that point. But there is, in this industry, a level of attrition. It just is part of the business. So we're always iterating on the best ways to retain agents and the best way to recruit agents. Yeah. So the goal is always to minimize that gap, right? Yeah. Hire as many as we can, 150 agents, and then keep as many of them as we can. So I'll go back to, we talked about it, the onboarding, getting them connected, getting them, productive. So if we can master that, which I don't think anybody will ever master, but if we can do an excellent job at that, that's going to increase our chances of keeping the agent here and creating that interdependence where, hey, we're better for you being here and you're better for being on the team, right? So there's always that balance of making sure that we're doing what we need to do operationally to support the agents so they understand the value of what we bring to the table, while also being able to communicate that to the agent coming in, but being okay with understanding that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that we control what we can control. We continue to make things better. Growth is always the vision, but we don't let it, consume us to the point where we're not continuing to move forward and continuing to recruit and continuing to grow and stopping things because, well, gosh, we lost 90 agents. We need to fix retention. Well, we do. We probably need to fix some form of retention, but we still need to go out and recruit and grow. So yes, it definitely is a balance, but I think it comes down to understanding it is part of the process, and we're going to do everything we can to minimize that gap as much as we can.
So I'm curious, what have you learned now that you've spent a lot of time like refining the training process? You're now going back and like updating it. Like, what have you learned, and like what changes? Like, for example, if someone wants to go create their own training process, maybe they don't have to deal with some of those learnings that you're changing.
I think one is try to make it as simple as possible, right? Don't overcomplicate it. We can tend to, because I think we provide, a plethora of things that an agent would see as valuable and are great tools for them to grow their business. But we don't need to hit them with it all at once, right? Yeah. So sometimes, I would say, I think there is a level of you kind of want to overwhelm them a little bit so they feel like, wow, this is a lot, and this is, why I joined the team, and wow, they have a lot, because you don't want them walking away going, this is it, right? So I think it's finding that balance between what you expose them to up front and the value proposition that you're bringing, and then clearly labeling out what the actual steps are to walk through it and making them feel like, yeah, we know it's a lot, but we're going to walk through it with you step by step. So I think what I've learned is making sure we have a clear communication of the value, that we give them enough of it to where they feel like they're getting the value when they're coming, and the feedback is, wow, you guys do a lot. But we're also not making them feel so overwhelmed that they just shut down and reject and deselect because it's just too much, right? And then, we probably, George probably mentioned this, and we have this somewhat philosophy of, through quantity comes quality,
Yep.
right? So also understanding that you're going to have those failure launches, right? Because you're probably taking a flyer on some people. We've hired some people and agents that we thought, yeah, we're not sure this is going to work. And man, they end up flourishing and being, some of our top agents. We've also hired some that we thought, oh, this agent's going to be a rock star and they're going to knock it out of the park. And they just never launched and they never made it, right? And so I think the idea is to make sure that, we're continuing to fine tune what our avatar is, but not being so tied to that avatar that we're not taking a risk, bringing people on to hopefully see that they see the value in the system. They take, the reins of that. They understand the culture that we have, and they're willing to invest in that and grow their business.
That's good, because like a lot of times it's trimming. It's not always adding things. So when you look at, if you just had to say like for example, like the buyer presentation, like what are a few fundamental things that like, if they don't learn this through training, like why have the training? Like these are the general fundamentals onboarding training needs to have.
Yeah, I would say initially my head goes to the things that are what the industry say are money-making activities versus the things that are operational, systematic, that can be done at any time.
Yeah.
So I'll give an example, right? We're evaluating the idea that we're a Google Workspace user, and we have training in there to how to use Google Workspace. But the reality is, you could be hired on today, you understand Google Workspace, you know it, you don't need that training. So I want that training available for those that need it, but I'm not sure it needs to be ingrained in our onboarding process to where every agent is exposed to that.
Yeah.
What I need to make sure that's on the onboarding and the training process is, and what our staff that's doing that and responsible for that is focused on is, what are the trainings that need to be in there that are leading them to the money-making activities to get them productive, while still having that available for those that need it, but creating the process that says, hey, we're going to focus on the things that are going to make you productive, not overwhelming you with the checkbox items that, yes, you need to know these are our systems. Yes, you need to know how to log in here. Yes, we'll get that to you, but it's not the thing that's going to get you productive the fastest. So we've been trying to eliminate the things that aren't in that realm of activities and being focused on the things that are actually going to get you productive and make you money.
That makes sense. Okay. And so for someone like a team leader, et cetera, who is in that growth phase, like what is the difference of what you do today as a COO versus like maybe just a traditional operations manager, like just to show the level of difference?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes down to size and scale. So like when I started, it was me. I had to do it all, right? I was the one having to actually build the automations in the back end. I was the one having to, get the system onboarded and make sure that everything was aligned so that we could launch it and use it, right? And then as you grow, you build departments under you and understand how to lead, right? So I think it goes from, more and more of you being in the weeds of doing the work, the operations staff, we call them operations staff, but at the end of the day, they're the ones doing the actual work. Now, we're not big enough to where, everyone has to work in our organization, right? There's a level of things that, like, if it's going to get done, you're going to have to do it, right? But as you scale, you build those layers, and now you're making sure from a holistic standpoint that things are being moved forward, and that you're managing those that are actually doing, the foundational groundwork to build the systems to launch, right? So, when I came on and we had 10 agents, and we had 4 staff, if something needed to get done, I was going to have to do it. Yeah. Or now with, we're at around that 26 staff. Now it's more of getting together with the leadership level, having a conversation and painting the vision, and then coming up with a plan that who's actually going to execute and hold accountability to that execution.
Nice. And curious, when you look at the 26, like obviously goes without saying everyone's important. What I'm curious is like, what are some staff hires or like rules that might be a little different than what some people expect in operations, or like just things that you had to learn to be like, oh, we need this for this, or et cetera?
I think the thing that I've learned is, again, I'll go back to, and a lot of times I kind of regurgitate the same thing, but we are a sales organization.
Yeah.
So a lot of times when we think of operations, we have to be careful that when we bring in somebody in operations that they're not so operational that they don't understand our job as staff, all 26 of our staff. Our job is at the end of the day to support the agent to do sales.
Yeah.
And so they have to be able to understand those things.
Yeah.
So when you're talking about hiring just in general, in what we do, every position has to understand that we are here to support the agent and the salespeople to do what they do best, right? That's our job.
Yeah.
Every system we build, every department we have, every technology we have, it at the end of the day is to help our agents do more business. So one is they have to be able to. Do you have certain roles like finance where you can kind of silo them and say, hey, your job is to make sure the money's going where it's supposed to go? Sure. But they also have to understand still, like, it is about making sales. Any company, if you're not making income, it doesn't matter, right? But I think that's the first thing that I would say to anybody in that position is, like, when you're hiring somebody, make sure they understand you're a sales organization, and what we do is support the agent, and that we can build all the operational systems and rules and SOPs, and we can build all that, but that has to give the freedom and the support to the people doing the sales. So that I would, I hope that answers your question. If you want me to go into it deeper, I can. But that's kind of where I look at, is making sure we're supporting sales.
Yeah, and I imagine that kind of looks like transaction coordinator, transaction management, VA type admin, and then like ISA are probably some of the big ones.
Yeah, 100%. Especially, that's a perfect example, right? Transaction coordinators are typically, we use the DISC, the DISC personality profiling. So high SC, they want to know that their checklists are in order, that they've got the documents where they need to be, that the broker requirements are fulfilled, and that's their job. But they also need to understand they're working for an agent who is probably a little scattered, who is probably, just out there trying to get the next contract. And they might not submit things properly, and they might not follow the SOP to the T to make sure they have everything they need. And that we're going to have to constantly communicate that. It's not a one-time communication. We're going to have to constantly reiterate the communication as to the process and how it makes things more efficient and how it helps them overall in their business. And they're still probably not going to always do it that way. So they have to have a level of understanding that there is going to be a part of their business that you're just going to have to be okay with, that it's going to be a little chaotic and it's going to be a little all over the place. Because some of our best salespeople, I'm never going to get to follow certain processes, right? It doesn't mean that we still don't try and we still don't operate under that process. It just means that we have to be mindful that we have to constantly communicate that, and we have to do it as a support, right? I'm not upset, I'm not mad. Hey, just a reminder, right? Making sure, hey, I'm here to help you. Let me show you how this actually helps you to do more business.
Nice. And I was curious, through all of this, have you kind of learned some numbers, kind of like, for example, 50 agents, like one pod leader, X transactions to this many, like, are there any key numbers that you've kind of learned across the roles? Yeah,
I mean, what we find, some of it comes down to the systems you have to help them
the scale
of it. But we find that, our agents, our TCs, and I want to clarify this too, like what one team has a TC do or a transaction manager do and what we have them do could be different.
Yeah.
But in our organization, what we find is that anywhere from that 50 to 60 active files at any given time from transaction manager is probably that sweet spot. They get into 70, some have a higher capacity. Our goal is to continue to create efficiencies where that can go up to 100, 150. I do know some organizations that have it in the hundreds. they're doing some things differently than we are. But at the end of the day, that's the goal, is to continue to create that margin. From a pod leader or regional team leader to, agent count, we've typically found that 25 to 30 agent per leader seems to be a balance. We do have, depending on the mix, we've seen it as high as 40 and 45.
Okay.
But at that point, it gets a little
gets out of
challenging.
whack, yeah.
It gets a little challenging, and it does depend on the mix, of the type of agents. George might have talked about, we do have level of agents, and that level is based on production and experience and those type of things. So, your newer level, what we call our base level or our level 1 agents probably are going to, most of the time they're going to require more attention. And if you have 30 of those, like, your capacity is shot, right? So if your mix is, more of a higher 3-4 level agent, and you only have a few, 1s and 2s, you probably have more capacity, because the things that you're coaching those, level 3s and 4s on, right, are more individual, one-on-one, and those things, where here you're doing a lot of group, but you're asking a lot of questions, and you're helping them probably a little bit more intently on getting their business going. So a lot of it does come down to that mix, but we found that 25 to 30 in general is some that can push 35, 40 depending on the mix.
Nice. And the support varies between a handful of things, I'm sure. Like level 1 is probably a little more group support sometimes.
Yes.
And then if you're in the top 20%, you probably get a lot more versus like in the middle or the bottom. I'm sure you have to kind of weigh some of that on both sides.
Yeah, I think the way we put that is, everyone has the same opportunity. Everyone, right? But the reason why there are levels is because the levels come with different benefits. So it comes down to what you do with that opportunity, right? So the more business you do, and the more you grow, the more benefits open up, right? Whether it's splits, whether it's operational support, whatever it is, right? It opens up, right? So yes, you are on level 1. You're doing a lot of group coaching. You're doing a lot of group activities. You're exposing them to the training and opportunities to go out and hone their skills. And as they show that they're actually doing the work and they're getting more productive, it opens up more opportunities for more individualized conversations, and more access to those type of individual type coachings and trainings and those type of things.
Nice. And I was curious if you can give just a general idea of levels, or how other teams should kind of think through, here's how they should create that tier structure for themselves. Yeah,
I think, you have to be mindful that, agents a good agent has an entrepreneurial spirit, right? They want to build something, they want to grow. And so what our job is to help them create the roadmap of what it looks like to grow their business, and how we support them, again, going back to that interdependence on, hey, we're better together, and how we can support your business. So we believe that when you're thinking through that, you need to give them that roadmap. You need to help them paint the vision to what that growth is. And if you don't, they're going to create it anyway because of that entrepreneurial spirit, and the challenge is, though, they're going to do it on their own and you won't be a part of it, right? And so if you can help them create that, and you can be a part of that vision casting and that growth, then again, we're creating that interdependence that says, hey, we can help you be better than you would be on your own, and you being a part of our team is better for us as well, because you're also helping us be successful, grow market share, and continue to have the opportunity to be out the forefront of what real estate is and provide better value to the consumer, because you're a great agent providing great service and continuing to grow the business.
Yeah, and that's how you have retention. It's you have ways for people to grow, and you're setting that vision. And the minute the organization's vision isn't big enough for the person, that's when they leave.
100%.
So makes a lot of sense. So curious from your vantage points for other team leaders, et cetera, what have you seen, learned, all of the above, when you've probably seen team leaders, some probably churn through operations people a little higher than others, and that's one of that's your right-hand person. And it's how do you create that great relationship between the CEO and the COO, the operations person?
Man, I'll just start by saying I feel like one of the luckiest people in the industry, because I believe I'm connected with a CEO and a visionary who not only speaks about being solutions based and being collaborative and really pouring into our core values and seeking to understand better than most that I've come in contact with. A lot of your team leaders are the ones who like their name in lights, who want to be the individual, and a lot of times your COOs or your operational support staff are kind of there to just support them in the business and those type of things. So I feel like I'm in a really good situation. So so when I speak on this, it's a little like it's hard for me to connect the dots, because I think the way that relationship builds starts with you're having a good leader. It starts from the top down, right? Like at the end of the day, that leader has to create an environment that empowers the people under them to do the role that they're there to do, and give them the freedom and the resources to do that. So one is how you build that relationship is like, hopefully you have a good leader that gives you the space to be who you are at your best. So that's one.
Double clicking on that for a minute, how do you, what should that leader do so that they don't run the operation person rampant with the 100+ ideas that they want to do?
Yeah, I think they should be who they are, right? Like, I think at the end of the day, that is their greatest strength. It is what drives the company. Mm-hmm. I think one is the one core value that I think that we have always just anchored on is the seeking to understand.
Okay.
Right? Like, I think if that leader can seek to understand what the other people are going through and what it takes to actually execute on those things, I think that's a good foundation to understand, like, hey, this is that. I'd love to do that for you. I'd love to get that accomplished. And I think that's a great idea. Just understand here's what it's going to take to get that. So that's kind of been where we built the foundation of what we do is, okay, here's the idea, here's the vision, here's where we're going. What's it going to take, right? And then being willing to have that conversation. As far as developing, that relationship, I've always come into it where my role is to try to say yes to everything, right? Like, my role is to look at what George is doing and what he sees as the vision, and that we collaborate together and come up with, yes, we can, is to try to say yes to as many things as possible. Where my nature, honestly, is to put on the brakes. Like, oh, we can't do that. Oh, slow that down. I'm not sure we can support that. I've had to learn over the years that is not actually helping put George and the organization in the position it needs to be in to continue to grow. If I'm constantly putting in brakes, that I could be, for instance, you asked about scale, right? And this is how, I'll give an example of how I think we work well together, and the way he approached it, and the way I received it, and the way we were able to grow to the next level. We hit a moment of, we were at that kind of tension of scale where we had enough agents, we were bringing enough staff, and I was still doing all the hiring, all the HR functions, all the financial functions, and still trying to do all the systems, automations, and operations, and we were just hitting a roadblock. And internally, it was like, if I wasn't doing the work, I wasn't doing my job, right? If I wasn't actually in the weeds doing the work, I wasn't doing my job. And if you ever talked about bringing somebody else in, then that must mean I'm not doing my job. Mm. And so George walks into my office and says, hey, I think it's time we bring somebody in, like an assistant for the operations side of what you do. And he communicated it in a way that was, because it is the one thing that's holding the business back from growing, not in a way that was, hey, you're not doing your job well enough. Like, he was seeking to understand the problems. We collaborated on the solution. And when we walked away from that, was like, you're right? In order to scale the business, like, we need to grow beyond this place where we're at, right? So I think part of that relationship is having the trust and open dialogue that, hey, I'm here to see you win, you're here to see me win, and we're here over the same thing as continue to grow. So I feel very fortunate that I have somebody that truly does operate in those core values and truly does understand that he has an abundance mindset that, man, we all, when the tide rises, all ship rises together, right? And so I just feel very fortunate. And so whenever I talk to people that are in that situation, it's somewhat it's hard for me to identify with them because I've been very fortunate. But I also know that, in that I take that, I have a great respect for what he brings to the table. And so I've learned over the years to just try to continue to say yes as much as I can, but also be honest with, hey, we could do that, but here's what it's going to take, right?
Yeah.
And paint the vision. So as long as we're doing that and we're communicating, then it seems to work really well.
Yeah. And I think you kind of taking that and being like, yeah, we can do that. Here's what it's going to take. And he's like, okay, maybe we can't exactly do that quite yet.
Yeah, it's like, hey, we can do that today with the way we're structured today. Here's what might need to change. Here's what we might need. Like, we had this goal. Does that goal or rock need to move in order to move this forward? We do that constantly. We review things on a quarterly basis. We're having weekly meetings. We're doing our annual planning events. So we're always having those conversations that, hey, we were going down this road. Maybe we need to make a shift. If we're going to make a shift, then these are the things that need to change, and just keeping that open.
Really quickly, before we get back into the episode, did you know that email beats the ROI of social media 40-1? If you want to turn your email list into more listing appointments, then you need to check out Ella. Ella is the only email marketing agency for real estate agents. We help you build a hyper-local email newsletter. We also send conversation starter emails, and we do way more. So you can turn your email into a profitable marketing channel this year. Click the link below. Check it out. Hope to see you in there. Let's get back to the episode.
Makes sense. And I imagine also having a system that you run on EOS. And like he mentioned, for example, like I think quarter four is like there's like 3 to 4 rocks. Might not be rough, but like that probably keeps confines of like, okay, here's the core focuses that we're gonna like drive towards.
100%. And it gives you that operational system to know that whatever we're doing, again, going back to that lens, we're looking at through the lens of that quarter and those goals and those rocks, right? So does it align with the mission? And if it doesn't for that quarter, then it's something that gets put on an issues list and gets discussed when the quarter's over, and we decide whether we continue those missions or we change the mission, right? And so having that system keeps everybody aligned and understanding what the main thing is, and that we keep driving towards that main thing. I also say, as much as George is the visionary and George is kind of the front of, who we are and what we do and drives the growth, he's also got an operational mind too, right? He's kind of a mix, between operations and that driving sales and, visionary. So it also helps me because he understands that part of it, right? He's not so far out there that it's like, whoa, I gotta rein you in. He understands what it takes to accomplish things, and I'll take that even as far back to what we talked about from a P&L and people standpoint. He also understands that if we're going to do that, that might cut into our margin, and we can have those conversations and discuss that and make the decision collaboratively and move forward accordingly.
Yeah, I'm sure that helps a ton.
It's huge.
What have you learned about like how to implement EOS correctly in the business?
EOS doesn't work unless everybody's willing to buy in. So, anything, they talk about the 5 dysfunctions of team, right? It starts with trust, right? And so everyone has to buy in and trust everybody in the organization and in the leadership group, really, and that core leadership group, that we're all on the same team to accomplish the same goals, right? It starts there. So if you can build that function, so that's one thing, is you can't implement an operating system if you have leadership that's not willing to actually use the operating system, that doesn't trust it. So you have to have that. I would also recommend, we've found really good success having kind of an outsource, some people will call it a facilitator, somebody who understands our business well enough to be able to be in it and discuss it, but is separate enough to be able to keep us on task and in the operating system. Mm-hmm. Hey guys, I know we're talking about this, but we need to stay focused over here. It helps us stay within the confines of the operating system and make sure when we're done, we've accomplished the goals that we need to accomplish.
Is that like a coach or like Was that
They call them like EOS.
EOS
Yeah,
facilitator?
they call them
Okay.
facilitators. I don't know if George mentioned we have a gentleman through Elite Performance. His name is Dave Richards. He kind of has a modified version of EOS that we follow, but he's the one that sets the agenda, understands what the goal is at the end of the meeting, and makes sure that we're moving through it in a way. Because as operators, right? Again, I told you George bends towards operations. I'm an operator. Our staff in general is, kind of bends to that way of thinking, more of the SC, if you're familiar with that disc scale.
disc.
We can get caught in the weeds, and we can focus on solving problems and finding solutions, and we never get to the end result, which is setting the core vision, creating the rocks, and creating the pathway for the next quarter. So he helps make sure that, okay, hey, we're in solutions right here when we're not supposed to be. Let's move that over here. Let's keep moving down the road we need to move through to get everything out before we find solutions.
And would the accountability system of all this generally be like the leadership meeting and then like the quarterly meeting, or is there anything else kind of missing, or is those kind of maybe some of the core accountability around it?
Yeah, the core accountability. So you think of it like we have our, we're getting ready to go into our kind of review of the third quarter. Fourth quarter is almost like just making sure that we're getting to that point where the fourth quarter is what the fourth quarter is. We're in the fourth quarter, and we're not going to change it. So the mindset now is more on what's 2026.
What's 2026?
Like. So we're getting ready to have our annual planning, which it starts out with a review of the year and projection of where we're going to end up, and then what are our key things we're going to move forward in 2026, right? And then we have that, and then we chunk them down at, okay, so then what's the first quarter of 2026 look like? And then we create those big rocks that we call it. And that means that, our leadership group, each one will have, or, whoever walks out of there with a core rock. And then they're going to have weekly meetings internally of those departments and the people that are involved in those rocks to come up with the actual, what we call 1-3-5s, right? The strategies and tactics that are going to execute on that and hold accountability in the next quarter as to what those, 7-day, 14-day action items are. And then we meet as a high-level leadership group every other week, and they meet as a core, leadership group on the other weeks. Okay. So we're meeting on a weekly basis to, hey, where are we at, and hold accountability to the progress, address any issues that are stopping us from moving forward and getting those things accomplished, and then creating the next section of tasks for the next 7 to 14 days, right? And so we do that, and then we have a quarterly meeting, again, to review the quarter, set the next quarter. And then we do that throughout the year. So we're having those weekly, bi-weekly meetings, we're having those quarterly review meetings, and then we're having the actual end of the year and then next year planning sessions.
Makes sense. And curious what's like the North Star, or each of these different substars, like you have sales volume, you have for example, sales number of transactions, and then you have like head count. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we try to come up with metrics that drive the mission, right? Okay. So, the metrics should be, of course we're in sales, so it's going to be sales volume, transaction count, right? Those things and then GCI, right? Because in the day, how many sales are we generating? What's the income we're generating? And then we'll also look at what are the other missions. So if recruiting's a mission, we want to set a goal for recruiting because we want people, we want to set a metric to keep people mindful of what we're trying to accomplish and create incentives to hit that goal. And then, this last year, one of the things was we wanted to close more listings. So we set a closed listing goal. Said, hey, out of all the transactions, we think X amount of these should be listings. And so we're going to set a listing goal, and then we're going to create rocks around that listing goal. And then throughout the year, we're going to meet and create, strategies and tactics on how to accomplish that listing goal throughout the year. So we look at those things, like what are we trying to move? And some of that's market, generated. One of the things we've looked at over the past, year and a half or so is listing success rate. Yep. It's like we're getting all these listings in, but how many of them are actually selling? And when the market is at, say, 68%, what do we need to do to drive a better listing success rate? And so we'll set that as a goal because that's something in our market that's struggling right now. And then we'll go ahead and work through those tactics and strategies on how to increase our listing success rate.
And just for like to kind of tie the loop for like strategy would be like, okay, we get listings through like Zillow Flex or like X or Y. Tactic is like, let's fix the basically completion rate or like can't reduce cancellation rate. We can do that through like better scripts or something like that.
Yeah, so like for listing strategy, for, increasing listing success rate, one of the strategies could be communicate to the seller more effectively what we're actually doing. And one of the tactics is creating what we call a seller report that's emailed to them every week that communicates
all the
listing activity,
yeah,
the amount of views, and all those things, right? So strategy is, communicate to the seller better and show them the value we're providing. And the tactic within that strategy is the actual report that we're emailing them on a weekly basis.
Yeah, which like Tom Ferry and Jimmy call like "Don't fire me" reports.
Yep. It's, I didn't want to, but yes, we call it the "Don't fire me" report. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is, convey the value that we're bringing to the consumer so that they see that we're actually, and then it holds accountability to us and the agents that we're actually doing the job that we say we're doing.
I'm curious, like when I think through all this, I'm like, what is the problem and how do we solve it? And then how do we make decisions? It's like, those are the fundamental principles of like what you have to decide. And I'm curious, have you guys thought through how to do that at scale or like how to make the right decisions and all of that?
Well, that goes back to our operating system.
Yeah.
So that's how we've been able to, it's the way we function is through that one common language, right? So what we do is, we spent a lot of time, for many years with our leadership group creating common language. And we've done that through, reading books. Like, so when we talk about levels of leadership and I say to my organization, hey, we need to probably be a little level 2 with this individual, they understand that's relational, right? Hey, we're level 1 on this, which is, hey, we're more positional and we're trying to get to level 3, which is a level of productivity. Like, we can have common language. So we go through whether it's reading a book together, investing in, coaching and training, so we can create that, common language so that we're not having to explain these things on a regular basis. So one of it is creating the system that says, I have a common language. So when I go in to have a meeting with you, I can say these things and you immediately understand what I'm talking about, okay? And then it's creating an environment of values in which we know we're going to operate under. So our 5 core values, right? So, understanding that anytime we're in a situation where we have to make a decision, does it align with our core values? And so that's a lens in which we operate under, right? And so now we've created a framework that now I have language that I can communicate with you on and you understand what I'm saying. And now you've created core values, a lens in which we make those decisions on. And then we understand that when we're operating under those seek to understands, collaboration, right, solutions based, that also means now I can have these collaborative conversations with you. And when we walk out of this meeting, we're aligned and we're all moving in the same direction. No matter what opinions happened in the meeting, we've decided we're moving out and we're all on board. And again, going back to that trust factor, we're all after the same mission. We trust that what you're doing and what you're doing and you're doing is all in line with the overall goal and rock and mission that we set.
Yeah, I think it's either a book or it's something. It's like How to Build a Cult, and it's just basically through the lens of business. It's like, this is how you do it. There's like common language, values, stuff like that.
Yep.
I'm curious, the values part. There's times I've done it myself, I'm sure others, where it's like you create values, but the organization doesn't actually know the values, or the values aren't always like reiterated, held. What have you learned about like how those values, like people can remember those values? Like, do you use as checklists, like literal checklists sometimes, or like, I'm just curious, how do you think through that of like, okay, everyone needs to be able to say it and know the values off the top of their head?
Yeah, so we think of it a couple ways. One is every time we have a meeting, like, our all agent meeting or anything like that, it's a slide in the deck, it's a conversation, it's a call out. So we go through and we always walk through, here are our core values, here are our core focuses. Today, we're going to highlight this core value, right? So we're constantly talking about it. That's one way. Another way is we call it out. We recognize it. Hey, thank you for being collaborative here. Thank you for acting with integrity here. Thank you for being solutions-based. And then we also, internally, like with staff, we have what we call acts of awesomeness. And we create core awards, and it's all based on we're giving you and we're recognizing you for exemplifying our core values, right? So it has to be continually talked about, has to be continually put up, almost ad nauseum, right? Almost to the point where it's like, oh, you get rolled eyes and like, okay, I get it, pursue excellence, seek to understand, act with integrity, be solutions-based, be collaborative, right? You see, it's to the point where it's like it just comes out naturally because you're talking about them all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so that's what I think we've learned is like they always have to be part of the conversation. And then you highlight and recognize those that exemplify those behaviors.
Yeah, repetition is the biggest thing.
Yep.
So curious for you, a few things. Like one, what books do you tend to give, like, for example, like, when you hire an admin or like when you hire someone else, like what books are kind of fundamental?
We've kind of been at, from when we were really growing in leadership, five levels of leadership was always huge to understand. Like that's part of our common language to understand what it means to be a leader within the organization. And we would give that and we would do that, to anybody, whether they were an actual leader or not, because our hope is that they grow in the organization and they eventually get to a point where they become a leader. And they also need to understand the language that leaders are using, right?
Yeah.
So 5 levels of leadership, Good to Great is a book that we really, have spent some time in. I think a lot, and then EOS Traction, that's more of a leadership, like so that they understand the basis of what our operating system is. We don't necessarily hand them out, and as far as that goes, but what we've done, and actually we've just had this discussion about getting back into the flow because as we're growing, new people are coming into the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Because it does get to the point where you've got a good, we've had some staff that have been here 7, 8 years, right? So at the end of the day, like they know it, they understand it. But as we grow and get more, now it's time to kind of revisit those things, make sure that they're ingrained in those things. So those are the ones that we've really leveraged. There's 5 dysfunctions of team, right? Those type of things as well. But really, we've kind of stayed within that, 5 levels of leadership, good to great, and then somewhat of that traction, EOS, Gino Wickman.
Nice. And curious for you, like, is there any people or podcasts that like you religiously follow to kind of keep learning from an operations leadership mindset?
I honestly, right now, the one that I really enjoy is the Founders Podcast. If you've heard of it, it is.
It's funny. He said the same thing, and I said I've been starting to listen to it.
Yeah, it's there's such a wide variety of leaders and founders, and the way that he runs it is like he can take a ton of information, get it down to a digestible form and really give you the good nuggets of what those individuals, how they lead, how they've been successful. And it's really good to listen to. So that's one of them. It's probably the one that I, really go to the most as far as podcasts and things that I'm listening to on a regular basis.
That's awesome. And tech for you, if like the fundamental tech things that you're like, I could not live without these. Are there any?
Gosh, man, I don't know if I could say I could not live without, but I would say, AI is a, buzzword, obviously, right? I think in this industry and in, scaling and growing, things are moving so rapidly, right? There's not one that I would necessarily recommend. What I would say, and my recommendation is, get familiar with them. Get familiar with what AI is doing, what the capabilities are, everything from simply helping you create an email to actually being something that actually carries out a task and does things for you. Just get involved to understand it at some level, but don't get so caught up in it. I've been saying this, and this might be a little cheesy, but I kind of been looking at it. If you're familiar with what the LaserDisc was, if anybody knows what a LaserDisc is, but it was the transition from VHS and beta, to the DVD. It was this large version of a DVD. I think, it was the vision of what the DVD was going to be. It was around for a very small, period of time, and, very few people had it. And I kind of feel like we're in that, LaserDisc era of AI where people, it's there, it's here, it's going to be here. And nobody knows what the end result is. And I don't think, I'm not sure that we can humanly comprehend what AI is going to do in the end. We can all have our dreams and visions, but we're in this LaserDisc area where it's cool. It's better than VHS and beta. And so we're just going to have to continue to see where it iterates. Just don't be afraid of it. Press into it, see where it can help you and leverage your business. But don't let it be the thing that you're so consumed with that you're not out there doing, because at the end of the day, it's still a relational business. It's still getting, belly to belly, and it should be used to enhance what you do best, which is build relationships and serve clients.
And if someone, for example, wanted to hire an operations person, what do you think they should look for? And then second, after that, once they start working together, what do you think is potentially either the fastest way for them to learn, or what helped you kind of learn as a leader?
One, I think I'm a huge believer in coaching, right? I think having an outside perspective and having somebody to have an outside view of what you're doing, and maybe even from a different industry, like I said, a coach, a mentor, somebody that you can bounce ideas off of, that you can have conversations. Maybe the conversation that you can't have, say as a COO, that I'm not necessarily going to bring it to George because I don't want to bother him with it, because it's me just processing and trying to solve a problem. Mm-hmm. So having a coach, having a mentor, having somebody that you can process the things through. So I would say, to me, that's one key thing. Have somebody that can pour into you and help you in those things that, as you're scaling and growing, I think I'm just a huge believer in that. Nice. And as far as, continuing in what you should look for operations, I think, I just think doers and the ability to critically think. To me, that's to be able to recognize when they look at something, whether that looks right or maybe that doesn't look quite right, and to have the just innate ability to go deeper, right? To get to the root cause of what the actual issue is. It could be, you're looking at a dashboard and that number just doesn't look right, but, really truly be someone who's trying to solve problems and isn't afraid to do the work.
It's kind of like an ID or DI in the disc.
A little bit. It's not really the I would say it's kind of a weird mix, like the DS.
Okay.
DS. You're willing to actually get in and do the work, but you can analyze what it is, and that's kind of rare. And that's actually more what George is actually, and I'm more of high on the SC, but I'm also understand when I have to go and be the D and do the driver things that need to be done. Yeah. That's part of the leadership side of it. But it's somebody that can critically think, somebody that is not afraid to get dirty and do the work. And then, last thing is don't be afraid to fail. Part of operations is testing things and breaking things, right? My dad, I call him a jack of all trades. The guy he was a certified electrician. He was certified in AC. He did a lot of blue collar work. And so growing up, I wasn't afraid to tear something apart and look at if it wasn't working, my first thought was, let's tear it apart and let's figure it out. Because in my mind, it was already broke. I can't break it anymore, right? And so don't be afraid to try things, right? So much of how you understand how to grow and move a business forward is by understanding the limitations and failures of things. And so don't be afraid to do that. And so that I'll even connect that back to the relationship between a COO and a COO is, George is extreme, like, obviously we don't want to lose money, but he's extremely supportive of the idea that we tried something, we invested time, money, and resources in, and it didn't work. But what did we learn from it? What are we going to do differently, and how are we going to move forward? And I'll even tie that back into our core values, right? Solutions-based, seek to understand, right? So I'm not out here pointing fingers and blaming somebody because it doesn't work. We're just going to evaluate what happened. We're going to try to work together on a better solution and move forward with something different.
Really quick on that, I was curious because we were just talking about that. Like, some people they've operationalized that failure through like maybe a head of failure, or they have like a project management system, which is just experiments that they're running.
Yeah.
I was curious, have you operationalized it in some way through like, we only do this amount of tests in this quarter, or like we're going to have this like KPI for it, or like just any type of operational?
Yeah, we call them pilots, right?
Okay.
So we run pilots all the time, and it's part of our, our rocks, right? So here are our rocks. So let's call it listing success. Maybe one of the tactics in there is a pilot. Let's try this. We're not sure if this is going to work. We think it is. So we're willing to invest a certain amount of time, effort, and resources, and let's see if it works at this scale.
Okay.
We think it could operate at a large scale. So one of the ways we do that is we might pick, a certain group of agents or a certain regional team and invest in them, whatever this, tactic is, right? And then if it's working and we think it will scale, then we'll go all in. So we call it pilots. We run these pilots, and some of them, they fall apart. Nothing ever happens with them. We tried, it didn't work, right? And so it creates that framework to know that, hey, we hope it succeeds, but understand too, the one responsible for it, if it doesn't, we're not pointing fingers. It just, we tried. We tried to, we call it firing bullets before we fire the cannonball.
Yep.
Like, we fired the bullet, didn't really work, so we're not going to fire the cannonball. We're going to go try to fire another bullet somewhere.
So it's kind of like you have a rock, and then maybe a strategy or a tactic is a pilot.
Yep.
Nice.
100%.
So, and the last question I have for you is like, what is world-class leadership to you? How does someone from your role as a COO show up with world-class leadership?
Oh, man. I would say world-class leadership to me is someone who truly is there, I call it servant leadership, right? So I'll say servant leadership, right? It's somebody who truly is doing what they're doing to benefit those and the people around them. That in our world, it's our agents and it's the consumer, right? And that truly wants to see everybody succeed, right? And that has an abundance mindset. So to me, world-class leadership is really wrapped around that servant leadership, that when you get into that type of role and responsibility, that you're serving the people of which you lead in a way that they know that you care for them, that you support them, and you want them to win, and you want the organization to win together.